Welcome to the Football West podcast. My name is Osric. Today we are going to be discussing ACL injuries and risk reduction strategies. And to help us with that conversation, we are joined by Kate Beerworth. Kate is a sports physiotherapist with extensive experience in this area. She has worked with the Westfield Matildas for over 10 years, including 3 World Cups, the 2007, 2011 and 2015 World Cups. She has also helped with the Australian Olympic team in 2016. She's the Vice President of the SA Sports Medicine Association, and she has a keen interest in football and netball. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking about ACL, but I guess before we start, we should probably set the scene. Could you just explain to us what an ACL is and why it's important?
Sure. So ACL is the anterior cruciate ligament, which is a stabilising ligament of the knee.
Okay.
And so the role of that is to provide stability of the shin bone against the thigh bone, so in the forward plane, but also it has a really big role in rotational stability, which is why it's so important in a multi-directional change of direction sport. So if someone has ruptured their anterior cruciate ligament, then they may have experienced some instability or giving way of their knee when they attempt to change direction or land from a height, such as a jumping action or jumping to head the ball or so forth. So it has a really dynamic role in stabilising the knee. And so in saying that, you can survive without an ACL if you choose to, do activities that don't require change of direction and so forth. So, but certainly for the athlete that wants to do a sport like football, it's a really important ligament to have that dynamic restraint of the knee.
One of the things that I was quite surprised about is that ACL is one of the highest recurring injuries in football.
Absolutely, yeah.
And yet it's a preventable injury, as in it's non-contact.
Yeah,
correct?
So 70% of ACL injuries are non-contact. So all the prevention strategies and the literature around that is largely targeted at those non-contact ones.
Right.
So what the strategies are about trying to change some modifiable factors that may predispose or, in other words, make someone more at risk of going on and sustaining that injury. But they are really common. So in the normal population, the risk is about 3%, but in higher risk sports like multi-directional sports, so not only soccer or football, but netball, basketball, rugby, it's about 9%. So playing a multi-directional sport does increase your chances.
So can you explain a little bit more about the consequences of an ACL injury? What sort of effect does that have on the athlete?
Yeah, so it can have quite devastating results, to be honest. So the highest incidence in females is at 15 to 19 years of age.
Okay.
So often we think, it doesn't happen to our young kids, but it really does. And that's, in girls, it's the highest sort of, number of injuries is in that sort of age group. And then for men, it's about 20 to 24. So if you think about, from a public health perspective, trying to keep females participating in sport, which is often a challenge, and through those adolescent years, if you have a devastating injury which takes you away from that sport for at least a year, then that certainly leads to participation dropout, confidence dropout and all those things. So it can be really devastating.
So there's a sort of psychological aspect to it.
Very much so. So whilst it's a common injury and reconstructions are high, the number of people that go back to their pre-injury level of activity is much less than we think. So in community level, it's about 55%. So a little more than half go back to what they were doing before, and the other half don't, and largely that is psychological.
Yes. Okay.
And fear of re-injury, which is a really common thing, and rehab's hard. Like the surgery for an ACL is, whilst it's an operation and there's an element of risk with that, it's relatively easy. It's passive. You kind of get wheeled in and it takes an hour and a half of someone else's fantastic technical work. But rehab is hours and hours and hours, thousands of hours of things that happen as a result of that. The other thing that's important to understand is that having an ACL injury in the first instance does put you at risk of having a second one. So it does have repercussions in terms of longevity of, doing the things that you, from a sporting perspective, doing what you love. And from a coaching perspective and a whole of football perspective, you take someone away from that technical drive and technical learning for a year, if you like. And then it really does take them a little while to get back into the kind of return to play, maybe at 12 months, but return to performance often can take 18 months or 2 years. So it has big implications, particularly in that adolescent group that are potentially trying to get identified and take that sort of next step. So,
which is interesting, because if we take on board what you've just said, I was also reading a research paper by the Medical Journal of Australia who were talking about the incidences of ACL and how it's affecting some of the younger kids as well, from 5 to 14. I think there was a significant increase. With all this information and knowledge, it begs the question then, why isn't it being taken more seriously?
Yeah.
And why aren't we doing more about it? Because, as you said, there's a cost implication, there's a psychological implication, the clubs suffer, the players suffer.
Yeah.
Which probably is a nice way to segue into your role at the FFA.
Yeah.
Because your title is a National ACL Prevention and Injury Prevention Coordinator.
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. But the mere fact that you have that role at the FFA suggests they're taking it very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is a massive issue.
Yeah.
And there's a program in place to try and help with this, which is the FIFA 11+.
Correct, yeah. So many years ago, so through my work at the Matildas, we certainly saw, on many occasions, players' career get cut short.
Right.
As a consequence of an ACL injury, not necessarily from the initial injury, but from the consequences down the track, and that might have been 5 years down the track or 10 years down the track, which if you injure your ACL at 14, having implications of that at 24 is, in the prime of your career. Mm-hmm. So really where this stemmed from was highlighting to the senior management at FFA that our biggest threat, and particularly in women's football, is an ACL injury. And we have a, protected talent pool, and we really need to protect them. It's not an endless supply like the Americas and the European countries that we come up against. So it was very much, we understand that this is an issue, and at elite level you can implement some strategies and you have a lot more control of that. But really, to get to the bottom of the problem is when we look at how to implement injury prevention programs, and there's lots of science around that, is really getting to the kind of the leadership and the organisational structure, which is getting it in as early as we can into the underpinning programs of community education, coach education, hopefully the new coaching curriculum that will come out in 2020. So FFA is very aware of it and very aware of player welfare, and certainly with the rise of the Matildas, that helps my cause in terms of being able to get some traction. And we have some very, we have a very talented group of women, but we need to really keep them healthy. And so there is media attention, there's government attention and all those things. So, on your own, it's very hard to do any of that, but you need the backing of the organisation and certainly the backing of the government and those things as well. And then from an NSO point of view, so from FFO's point of view, then we've got to be able to provide member feds like Football West with some resources and some strategies to implement it in a community level where the resources are much less than they are at that elite level.
Yes, okay. So it's very much about education, evangelising, and then supporting that message all the way from elite down to grassroots, effectively.
Yeah, very much so, because, coach education is absolutely the key.
Yes.
And there are lots of barriers around why the 11 plus doesn't get implemented into programs, and it's time and it's the unknown and it's, the perception of difficulty, but there is lots of simple ways that you can do that. And it's just about, really understanding, okay, are we on board here and we really want to protect our players? And then it's about trying to provide some of those practical strategies on how you can do that at your club and so forth. Yeah.
Okay, so let's pick up on that and talk a little bit about the solutions.
Yeah.
The 11 Plus program is designed to help get people on board. Can we just talk a little bit about what is the 11
What is the
Plus?
program? Yeah, so the program was developed, and why there is so much good evidence in football is, as we all know, which is probably why we all love football, it is the world game. And
Indeed.
Coming from a non-football background, that's what football, and working in that for the last 15 years has really taught me. So, but from a research perspective, that's fantastic because there is so much data on football. There is not much data on AFL. There's certainly no data on AFL women and netball. But because we play it in so many countries, there's really powerful research. And that research undoubtedly tells us that these injury prevention programs work. So they work to reduce all injuries between 30 to 50% if they are done properly and if they're done regularly, and they certainly can reduce ACL injury. And largely what the program is it's a complete warm-up. So it's not designed to be done in addition to the warm-up, it's to replace the warm-up. And there's 3 components to the 11 plus. So part 1 and part 3 are largely running and moving and some coordination and control around the trunk and the pelvis, so some changing direction.
Yep.
And then part 2 is a strength-based, strength, balance and plyometric component. The part 2 is the bit that often is the bit that people don't like doing, so they take that out. But the really important thing that's come out of recent research, so Matt Whalen is a physio based at Football South Coast in New South Wales, and Matt's done some great work and has done his PhD around what is the efficacy or what's the efficiency of the FIFA 11 plus if we take that part 2 of the program and do it at the end of the session as opposed to the start of the session.
Right.
And overwhelmingly his results is fantastic, because what it tells us is it reduces the injuries even more so as compared to doing the traditional 11 plus.
Yep.
And largely the reason is that you're more likely to get uptake, and the compliance therefore is higher.
Right.
And therefore, like medication, dosage or the amount of exercise that you do is important. So if they're not doing it, so if you don't take your medication, it's not going to do anything. If you don't do your exercise, it's not going to do anything. So having a strategy where you can do it at the end of the session is really important, because that's often the bit that is less likely to get uptake with players and coaches. So there's a hamstring strengthening exercise in there, there's trunk strengthening. So all those things are helpful for injury prevention, but the bonus of it is they're good for performance. So if someone's not particularly strong through their trunk, then they're going to get pushed off the ball quickly, or they won't be able to change direction and track their player quickly, and they won't be able to jump as high to defend the ball. So there is a massive bonus in that performance result. So if you tell someone you're doing these exercises for injury prevention, it's hard to get a sell.
Right.
Because the truth about injury prevention is we don't know who will prevent and we don't know when, but everyone wants to win. So if it helps performance and you've got more players on the pitch, more players to choose from, then we've certainly got that angle. And that's certainly the big kind of carrot that we need to work with when we're talking with coaches about why this program is so important.
And I think the fact that it's evidence-based and you have the data to support that message
that's right.
is very compelling.
Yeah, everyone's got an opinion, but if you're trying to present your own opinion as fact, then that's where we get into trouble. But this is backed by very robust science that has been done for many, many years. But it's the implementation and the actual filtering that out, that's the hard part. Yeah.
Okay, so let's just finish on that then. As a final question, what steps would you recommend, or are there resources that coaches or parents or players, if they are interested in this area, how would you suggest they progress?
Yeah, great. There's lots of good online resources. So the 11 plus is really geared at people probably 14 years and above.
Okay.
There are some exercises in there which can be a bit of the strength part that can be a bit tricky for adolescent girls, and so there is, you can always adapt the theme of the exercise and make it a bit easier. For example, with the Nordic hamstring exercise, that can be a bit challenging. But it can be replaced with another hamstring exercise. So as long as those concepts are in there, I think you're still maintaining some kind of fidelity with the program. Okay. So if you Google the 11 plus, potentially we could give some links to Football West, so we can pop them up on the website. But the 11 plus, there'll be, there's a PDF, there's videos available. The easiest way to access it, I think, from a mobile device point of view, there is an app called Get Set.
Okay.
So 2 words, Get Set, and it's developed by the Oslo Sports Trauma Research Centre, which is a Norwegian initiative based on not winning a gold medal in the 2000 Olympics because 2 of their key players had an ACL. Okay. So the Oslo Sports Trauma Research Centre does fantastic work, but this app developed in conjunction with the IOC. There is, and it's free, downloadable on iOS and Android, and the football section on that is the FIFA 11 Plus, and so it's accessible on your mobile, which is great. There is also an 11 Plus Kids. So again, if you Google that, there's a PDF and there's a manual that you can do, which is for that kind of, there's a bit more play and about rolling, and so that's a really good option if you're working with, say, under 12s. So they're really good resources that can help. But I think the other thing in terms of if you're trying to adopt it is maybe adopt one part at a time rather than trying to roll the whole thing out straight away.
Yep.
And particularly with the strength part, consider doing it at the end and then maybe adding one of those. There's 6 exercises in that of 3 different levels. If you do level 1 for the first exercise, they might be appropriate to be doing level 2 for the second exercise, so they can certainly work through the levels. But if you did one exercise, a session,
Yep.
then you might start to sort of get, rather than trying to, overload them with too much information.
Right.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So steady as you go and progressive
Yep.
and work your way into it.
Yeah, perfect. All right,
Thanks for your
great.
time, Kate.
Thank you. Great.
You've been listening to a Football West podcast. Don't forget to visit us online at footballwest.com.au for more information about ACL injury and risk reduction, as well as links to some of the documents and articles mentioned during this podcast. If you have any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Email us info@footballwest.com.au. Otherwise, see you next time.